Board games with Dutch priority auctions. Board games war examining mechanisms. Alan and I have a series that's long, that will continue after this song. We're examining every mechanism listed by BGG in kind of brought upon by this book that we both did read. And Isaac Shalev and Jeff Engelstein made up some stuff and also did some investigation, and we'll do some more investigation because I guess it's never enough. Good morning, good afternoon, whatever it is, wherever you are. 10 a.m. ish UK time. Time for Busy Beats and Board Game Blether. And
Yes.
today we are examining Dutch priority auctions, which is something that was completely invented. So, this term, they said in the book, this is our own invention. There's not a lot of games that use this. There's basically 3 games using what's properly a Dutch priority auction. I would like to also talk about 1848 Australia and talk about how it's almost a Dutch priority auction and how it could become a Dutch priority auction. And as usual with this kind of stuff, we might get a bit theoretical as well.
We might.
What's your initial thoughts about this? And hello, welcome, Alan Paull. Thank you for joining me. And for those who don't know you, there's a little bit running down the bottom of the screen.
Yeah.
But what would you like people to know about yourself?
I'm very glad to be here as ever, Bez. I think people who have been watching this know me already. I'm a long-time designer and player of board games, and I wibble on a bit about wargaming occasionally when you can't stop me. Dutch priority auction. I mean, the thing that struck me immediately was, Dutch auctions, which we've done a little bit on. Dutch priority auction seemed like a made-up thing, and actually, yes, it is a made-up thing. And I'm puzzled a little bit as to why they did. There's a very few games. If you do a search on Board Game Geek, 5 games come up. One of which seems to be
completely miscategorized.
Miscategorized, and 2
one
of
them's
them
kind of miscategorized.
Well, yeah, two of them are actually versions of effectively the same game, just rethemed. So there's really, it boils down to kind of 2 games in the category.
Yeah,
Now,
I would be really interested. I feel like maybe we should at some point just ask them why.
Yeah,
I mean, was this an indication that Jeff Engelstein and Isaac Shalev expected there to be more of this? Because once you give something a name, it does mean that there's going to potentially be more. And did they feel like this is such a fascinating concept that they really wanted to shine a spotlight on it? I don't know, but
I think as I used to do classification quite a lot in my main work used to be classification, and I suspect it's one of those. When you do classification, what you do is you're trying to, if you've got a large amount of different pieces of data, you have to allocate records to a particular class or not. Now, the problem you've got is, what do you do with those things which don't actually quite fit with your definitions of individual classes? So generally what you do is you'll have something which says, well, in this case, it might be something like auction other. And it becomes a kind of bucket, a bucket of things that don't fit in the other classifications. Now, if you're doing classification, you want to avoid that, because over time, the other buckets get fuller and fuller and fuller, and then your classification becomes less useful because people can't filter out. Because other might mean 2 completely wildly different types of things in auctions.
Absolutely.
So I suspect that because you can actually see the difference between a Dutch auction and a Dutch priority auction or any other type.
Completely different.
Completely different. And I think because you can have a class for that, and it does make sense inherently in the classification system, then you could say, well, why not just put it in, even if it is a bit. It's not quite unique. You don't want unique things. You don't want auction other to have only one thing in it, because that doesn't make any sense. Because,
sure,
well,
but
why not?
We have found little lists on,
Mm.
you know, the Dutch auctions that aren't quite a Dutch auction, and here we'll talk about like multiple
Yeah.
lot auctions. I
Yes.
mean, it feels like yeah, let's get wholly into the categorization in a moment,
Yeah,
but
sure.
it feels like kind of, if we are to really drill down to it, the way I understand it, in my own words, Dutch priority auction, it's got two halves. First half, you're building up the value by placing bids. Second half, you're deciding whether to bid or not when it goes in the Dutch auction and it de-escalates. And it's kind
Yes.
of a modifier to a multiple lot Dutch auction, because you can
It's
have it, and
yes.
it's almost also a modifier to multiple lot Dutch auction that's going in a turn-based system.
Yes.
So if you've
That's
got a multiple lot Dutch auction that's going in a turn-based system where one person has priority, that's still not a Dutch priority auction. And so it does feel overly specific to my mind. It feels like it should almost have been, hey, let's talk about this raising of prices in absence of whether it finishes in a Dutch auction or not. That's my viewpoint right
maybe.
now.
I think it's one of those cases. It's so far from an actual Dutch auction that it probably doesn't make. If you're looking for a Dutch auction game, Speicherstadt or Spirium wouldn't be it. It's just there's
Mm,
just not really. I mean,
it's got elements. It's got like
it's
a.
pretty tenuous. It's well, we can talk about that in a minute, but
Let's
that
go
feels tenuous
into
to me. Yes,
recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights. Recent highlights, playing games and other delights.
hey,
Recent highlights. Oh well,
what have you
my
been doing then, Bez? What have you been doing?
Oh yes, I remember now. I had a friend over. We played the tutorial of Time Stories. Have you played Time Stories at all?
I have not played Time Story. It's a bit of a gap, really, because it was incredibly popular when it came out, wasn't it? And
Yeah.
I never played it.
So I spent a bit of money
Hmm.
secondhand buying the entire white box
Oh,
collection,
right. Okay.
and
Mhm.
I might be able to reach, just if you give me 10 seconds. Here we go. So
Oh,
this
there we
is
are.
one of the expansion boxes, Brotherhood of the
Right.
Coast. This is the second last one, and I think
Right.
that a lot of people rate this one quite highly. We played the prelude to this, and we both said, yeah, this is interesting, but firstly, why is it 2 to 4? I understand that, yes, there is some people talk about there being some storytelling that you're not meant to share
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly what you see. And rules say, hey, to encourage role playing, don't tell the other person exactly what you read. Try to paraphrase and put it into your own words, which
Right.
is
Okay.
kind of a lot to ask of people. Um, like if it's an image and then you have to describe that image, you're automatically doing it in your own words, which is
Yes.
nice. But if
Hmm.
it's text,
It's
and
yes. Hmm.
the temptation is always to just read it out loud. We got to the
Yes.
end. It's this short thing, which is meant to take about an hour. We took like maybe 2 hours over it,
Yeah.
and you go through, you reset, you say, okay, I want to next time not do that, not do that. I've already got the information. I don't need to do this. Sometimes some of the things you do might be actually bad for you. So you might, I'm not going to share spoilers, but in a hypothetical scenario, there might be a scenario where you attack someone,
Hmm.
and then if you attack them, then this was just an innocent person, and why did
Yes.
you attack
Exactly.
them? And that's
Yes.
going to cause trouble for you.
Yes.
You do get the potential to set yourself off a wrong course, which is kind of nice. And then if you've done that, then bad things might happen in the future for you. So you'll
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
oh, well, I better not do that. I thought there was something bad going on there, but I guess that person's innocent. This is not a spoiler, by the way. This is just a. And I do enjoy the writing. It's a nice game. We did notice like 2 typos over the course of like maybe 100 cards, which it's yeah, it's slightly unsatisfying, but for something that they were just doing for basically convention demos and shop demos, that feels like high
Right.
production.
Yes. Yeah. So does it depend on the group about in terms of the actual effectiveness? Because it's a storytelling type game, isn't it? I mean, for
It's
example, I
like
mean, the example I use is Braggart, which is a completely different game. Braggart, where you're putting cards down to make bragging in a pub. Now, in some groups that we play Braggart with, people just read out the cards, which is quite boring. But a lot of people are not happy to do anything other than that.
absolutely.
Whereas in other groups, especially if we use role players, they will elaborate and have a big story about it. It's 3 cards with like 3 words on each card, and they might go on for 5 minutes of a story about how this thing happened. So it
I
really does
think it's a
depend on the
bit
group.
different. And just a quick hello to Yoda, and I appreciate the
Aye,
joke about
aye.
the Dutch priority auctions. But I think it's different because in Braggart, the story is essentially inconsequential to the
Yes,
point
it is.
scoring.
But
In time stories, the story is very important.
right, okay.
So again, this is not a spoiler. This is just me inventing stuff. You might find out, oh, there's a clown who's lost his shoes, but he wants them to never be touched. And so later on,
Right.
when you see the shoes, you can't touch the shoes. You've got to bring the clown to the shoes, for example.
Yes, right.
Something like that. And
So it's really
the
integrated to the
information
story.
has to
Yes,
lead to your
yes.
decision. It's basically, if there are puzzles, I would say the puzzles are more about memory. They're not
Right.
about observation like Unlock
Yeah,
or
yeah.
mathematical thinking like the Exit series.
Right,
It's
right.
more a case of, I mean, from what I've seen from this tutorial, it's a case of, oh, well, that wanted to do that and that led to that. So in that case, that's not necessary. So we should skip that. So it's kind of like a typical strategy game, but you get to see the entire possibility tree and you've got to work
Yes.
out an efficient way to do it so
Right.
that you can do it in the limited time you've got.
I think we're going to have some interesting discussions when we get to storytelling mechanics. But that's in the S series. This is a bit like QI. I don't know if you know QI, where you have and we're still on A. So by the time we get to storytelling, which will be S, I think
there are a lot more A's than everything else.
will I still be around? I don't know. We'll see.
We also play Tiny Ninjas, which is
Uh-huh.
very luck based, and I played a few games on Board Game Arena that I'm just carrying on. Have you played Sobek, this version, the tile based version for 2 players only?
I don't think so.
So this is completely different to the Sobek that we were discussing.
Right. Oh, okay.
So there's a bunch of tiles, as you see. There's the Ankh token that gives you a direction. In this scenario,
Okay.
each thing that I could pick then determines what the next person can pick. So if I pick this green wild tile, then the Ankh would go this way. So they could pick the wheat, the pink marble. I don't know why marble's pink in this game, or another wild card. Conversely, I can skip over that and get the pink, but in this example, I am going to get the wild thing. And so as you see, now it determines what they are able to pick. I've got to, if you want to play the game at a high level, you've got to be aware, yes, the ivory is the best value, and the marble and the slate, and then the other 3 are much of a muchness. Characters give it some extra wrinkles. There's a balance between wanting to create big sets and not wanting to be caught out by the scribe or the other character that knocks you down if you've got more than 6 cards, 6 tiles even. And there's also the incentive to wait, so you've got a lot of stuff to sell, or sell early, and then you get one of these tiles on the side. And obviously, if you sell early, you get whichever one you consider the best one, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Well, that sounds fun. Games that I've been playing. Well, yesterday evening I played online, which is nice with our regular Tuesday evening group. We played Living Forest a couple of times on BGA. And it's just gone premium on BGA just yesterday, but never mind. I think we are premium backers on BGA. And that was fun. I like Living Forest. Do you know it? Basically,
I don't know it, but I did see that Charlie had played.
Yeah, it's got strategy because you win by having 12 in a category. So 12, the categories might be extinguishing fires or getting flowers or getting trees. So you're taking actions, and you get one action a turn or two actions a turn, depending on push your luck card drawing mechanism from your own deck of cards. And the drawing of the cards gives you effectively resources to use during that turn for planting trees or for extinguishing fires like water bits, or flowers overall, which can be a thing you get. If you get 12 flowers in your array, then you can win. If you get 12 different types of trees, you win. If you extinguish 12 fires, you win. And those are all developed through the push your luck card drawing mechanism. So you can't, in this game, you can't do them all. You're basically picking one, and you might one route to victory, and you might have a secondary one if somebody else jumps onto the one that you originally picked. And it's got a lovely
element of point salad-iness where you need to really say, "Yep, I'm not doing that. I'm doing this," and pick your target.
Yes, you need to pick your target. It's not a point salad, because you win if you get 12 points in any single category of the three categories. So it's really there's the tactical elements. Is there may be some good cards in the array that you're going to pick. You buy more cards to add to your deck, so it's got deck building in it as well. Of course, other people are trying to buy those cards too, so you're hoping to get the right cards that fit with your strategy, but they might not be there, or there might be slightly weaker ones. There's a lot of decision points in the game tactically, but then strategically you're trying to prevent other people from getting to the 12 in their category while also getting to 12 in yours. And that's where the kind of balance of your actions kind of comes down. Sometimes if somebody's on like 10 in their category,
then
say
you start blocking them.
You start having to block them, and your actions become a bit more forced. But it's all about reading the other players and what they're trying to do, while trying to maximize.
So is that a strong recommendation for everyone to check this out?
Yes, I think it's a good game. It's got lovely artwork. It's got a kind of forest spirit of the forest theme. You're trying to save forests, hence living forest. So it's a nice theme. It's got a good artwork, and it's pretty damn streamlined gameplay. It's really good. Well, check it out if you can. Yeah, it's good. We also played Zex Nimt. Then
yes,
because why not? that was fun. And earlier on, I think the day before yesterday, I actually played Sagani with Charlie again. 2-player Sagani, another new
let's
game.
push on, because I think
We've
I
got a
realize
lot to
that
get through.
talked about a lot as well. So we should probably talk about categorization. We already started talking about it, but why is categorization important? Why is it brilliant to have words for these things? Brilliant thing. It's a little thing, which is brilliant. I mean, obviously, words help us communicate, but is there any more to it than that?
Well, I mean, in this case, yes. I've always been in favor of actual categorization. If you're doing searches in large data sets, I've always personally been in favor of actual classification. In other words, making sure that things are categorized efficiently and effectively by professional categorizers. The problem if you don't do that, for example, I mean, classic examples are, say you do a search without categorization, and you search on the words in the description of the game. Well, you could have a situation where the game says, this is not an auction game. Now, trouble is, if you do a search on auction, that game will come up in your results when it specifically isn't an auction game. And you could have a game which is an auction game, but doesn't happen to mention the word auction in the description, in which case it won't come up. So you've got two problems in terms of the search there.
Yeah, both
one is
false positives,
and one is
false negatives.
False negatives. So that's why I think classification can be quite important. Well, it is brilliant, obviously.
Yeah,
That's
and
why.
it's not enough to just make these words, but I think it is brilliant being able to go onto Board Game Geek and hopefully, even though there will be some mistakes, like we'll talk about
Yeah.
Small World,
Mhm.
for the most part, it's correct, and people are
Yes.
trying to keep it correct.
I think
Um,
the important thing here is that people do try to keep it correct sometimes. I mean, in the sense
yeah,
that it is a managed process. It's not a top-down managed process. It's a decentralized process. So that if you see something which is wrong, like we recognise here that Small World isn't really a Dutch priority auction. It's just miscategorized. So if we spot things like that, we can suggest to the editors that they might want to change that. In
yes,
which
and I've
case,
sent in a request,
like Wikipedia, you can make amendments to this, and people do. So
but it can be a bit slow, and I'm guessing that in a couple of weeks' time, it still won't have changed.
yes, it
Because,
depends whether somebody recognizes it, which is not a big
well,
problem.
I mentioned it to them, but then they've got to look at it and they've
Yeah,
got to check for themselves. So, what does this mean? And it almost
Exactly.
feels like I understand they don't want the average person to just be able to say, no, that's wrong, that's wrong. But it does feel like
yeah.
there should be something more than just a moderator who I understand they work hard, I understand they do lots of stuff, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they understand all these mechanisms perfectly, because I certainly didn't, even after reading through the entire book before doing this and having a proper ponder.
I think the Board Game Geeks method of categorization is pretty good. The other thing you need when you've got a classification system is you need to define each category, which I have done. Hence the book. So I mean, the one of the worst things you can have in a data set which is categorized in lots of different ways if they're not even defined.
Yeah, I mean, look at a typical music
Yeah.
shop, like from a couple of decades ago, I guess, because there really aren't typical music shops anymore. But let's move on to talking about the main topic.
Shall I
And let's
read
comment,
out?
ask questions
Yeah.
from follow.
Yeah.
Yes, please
Try and
do
read
read
out
it out.
what it says. A Dutch priority auction, a term of our own invention, which we mentioned earlier, is a multiple lot auction in which prices for the lots are determined based on the number of bids placed on the lots up for bid. The winning bidder is the first player in bid priority who chooses to pay the current price for a lot, which is equal to the number of bidding tokens there. Priority may be determined by a number of factors, including global turn order or turn order for each lot based on the order of bid placement. Players may typically, and this is important, players may typically pass on the purchase when they are the priority bidder by removing their bidding token. This has the effect of reducing the price for the lot by 1. So here, basically, the first part, when you're placing your bids, increases the price of the lot. And then the second part, when people are deciding whether they want to buy or not, may reduce the price of the lot. So it's similar to the Dutch auction in the sense that when you are actually deciding on whether you're going to buy, it'll be a high price if you choose to buy. So the price will come down if you choose not to buy. But on the other hand, the prices at the start go up rather than coming in a Dutch auction.
And
They come
it's
down.
quite
So
a
it's
complex system to have listed as one mechanism. And I would probably make an argument that there's 3 things going on here. There's the fact that it is kind of a tenuous Dutch auction. It's like a weak Dutch auction.
Yeah.
There's the fact that it's a multiple lot auction, that there's multiple things happening at once.
Which also suggests not Dutch, although
it's a variant. Okay, we could call it multiple lots Dutch auction.
It's a bit like it's as much a Dutch auction possibly, or it's towards a Dutch auction in the same way that Through the Ages is, i.e., not very much. It's not to do with the timing is to do with.
This is as much a Dutch auction as
or
Spiegelstadt is as much a Dutch auction as half the things that are listed as Dutch auction.
Yes, yeah.
There's not really any better place to put this. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes. I actually.
The key thing, the third thing is that at the start you raise the price, and this is the key thing, that it's under player agency what that starting ceiling is, because the concept of the Dutch auction is that there is no floor. Well, there might be, but like there's a ceiling, and then it keeps dropping. So where does it start from? We don't know. I mean, it might be different based on the different groups. So what if, given that the value of things can vary depending on the current game state, what if we let the players determine the starting price? And that's the interesting thing about the Dutch priority auction, I think.
Yes, and the purest one is probably is the Speicherstadt, which means
absolutely
warehouse city.
There's lots of competition. We'll get into that.
No.
So if we look at
the Speicherstadt one is the purest one. It basically here you're bidding on lot. The plot is that you're all in a city. It's a warehouse district, and you are buying goods for warehouses, but you have to make sure that you buy firemen, because if there's fires, it will not burn down bits of the city. That's the kind of thing.
But fundamentally, the key thing here is, in the first stage, your little meat pools are your opportunities to bid, and you're placing them.
And the price is determined, I think
by
exclusively by the number of meeples. So basically, if there's 4 meeples on there, the price will be 4 for the person with the meeple at the top of the group of meeples. And if that person,
it's from the bottom to the top.
Is it bottom?
So it's kind of first in, first out.
It's been a while since I played.
So here, if orange would have placed first, and then black, and then blue, and then white, and then orange. And what happens here is that orange might say, well, I don't want to pay 5 for this.
Mm-hmm.
Black will say, no, I don't want to pay 4 for it. They were hoping to get a great price, but they don't manage to get in. Blue's like, 3, maybe not. And then obviously at this point, orange is hoping that white passes it up. So orange can just get it for 1, but white takes it for 2, for example.
Yeah.
And that's the way that it might go. Whereas the other 2, where there's just 1 blue meeple over here, and 1 orange meeple over here, wow, that's really zoomed in. The blue and orange will just be able to pay 1, and happy days. There is no contest.
Yep.
This is a game where money is tight, and this is a big part of the game. Before we leave the notion of how it's been defined, so I want just to point out, yes, the Board Game Geek description leaves out the section about them having invented it, and it summarizes the rest of the chapter of talking about the Speicherstadt. And I think we both, before we progress, we're both agreed Small World has absolutely no sense being here.
No, not at all. It is interesting that the description of the definition specifies Speicherstadt. I mean, like Speicherstadt invented this particular mechanism, which is very, very specific. Obviously, that's a very, very specific thing. So you're really it is pushing it a little bit, I suppose. If there hadn't been Spirium, would you have put this in as a classification? Probably not. With Spirium and possibly 1848, I don't know about
that. Let's just quickly show Jurvik, which is by the same designer, Stefan Feld.
It's just
it's
re-implementation.
Just got a few tweaks, but you can see it looks very different. And again,
I haven't played that version. I've played Speicherstadt. I've played Speicherstadt a few times. I can't remember, one of our friends
once. It's very interesting, for sure.
It's a really lovely.
A lot of games with properly unique twists on mechanisms. I mean, the auctions are tricky at the best of times. when there's low granularity, by which I mean it's really chunky, you're not deciding between 14 and 15. You're deciding between 1, 2, and
1 to
3.
4, 1 exactly. That I mean,
And this
the
is
wonderful thing about that is it's really focusing in. So normally in this game, it's got 5. Now, you can have more than 1 meeple, of course. So you can have more than 1 meeple, so you can increase the price beyond 4 if you know it's a
Sure,
four-player
but
game.
it's
But
going to be very unlikely given that
yeah,
in Speichersatz you started with 3 money. But
yeah. The money is
let's
incredibly tight.
talk about this one. So this is Spirium,
Yep.
and the way I've not played this one myself, but
I have played it 2 or 3 times, but quite a long time ago.
so I just having read through the looked
Yeah.
at the how to plays. You're
Yeah.
putting down little meatballs between 2 cards, and that's phase 1, setting the bid value. But it's not just about what's between this card here and this card here. It's also about what's on the other sides of the same card. So you are increasing the prices of 2 cards by any location where your meatball might be. It's a 2-dimensional grid, not just an array of
That's right.
independent prices.
So you have a choice of lot as well as as increasing the price, as I understand it. I think I remember.
Yes. The other thing is that these things have a floor price, which is going to be increased. So you can see here, this is worth at least 3. This one's worth, oh no, wait, that one's worth at least 5. Sorry, this one's worth at least 2. This one's worth at least 4. And then the other interesting thing is that when you take your meatballs away, if you pass, if you don't want to bid and pay the asking price for the auction and you're lowering that price for other people, you get to take money equal to the number of meeples that are there.
Yeah. So one of the great strategies in Spirium, of course, is to go to a card without the intention of actually buying it at all. It's just for income, which means that money is, I suppose, theoretically slightly less tight than Speicherstadt, because you can get income directly from a card early in the auction, and then use that money somewhere else to buy another card later in that auction period. I think
because you're taking off your meatballs in any order you want.
Yes,
it's not like Speicherstadt where you do it this lot, then that lot, then that lot, then that lot.
This is another difference here. If you look at something like Through the Ages, which was the turn order based Dutch auction, when it's your turn in Through the Ages, you are picking which lot to buy from the array of lots. In Speicherstadt, the purchasing is not in turn. It's not in turn order. It's in the sequence laid down on the board. So you start at the left and you go to the right. So if you've got the first meeple on the first lot, you get the first choice of whether to purchase, and then you work across. So that the interesting thing about Speicherstadt, which is another reason why it's really great, is that it actually really does matter the price. If the price towards the end of the auction is high, that really can be critical, because by the time you get there, you might have run out of money, or you might plan not to buy late in the auction because you won't have any money left.
In terms of decision space, the Speicherstadt system, where it's in a strict order, does front load your decisions slightly.
It really does.
It almost gives more. It gives more meaning to those early decisions that you make in that first half, whereas in Spirium, well, you've got to get out clause, and you can take these back in any order. It feels like, well, I can play it. I've not played this one, but I'm imagining that it would feel a bit more fast and loose almost.
It's still pretty tight. It's still pretty tight because you're still aiming. When you place a meeple in Spirium, you're still aiming for your best possible outcome that you can get. And okay, there's a compensation if it doesn't quite work out right, but that's not what you still want your best outcome. So you're still planning, hopefully, for your best outcome. You're still planning and hoping for your best outcome. And it can feel painful in Spirium to not have that. In Speicherstadt, sometimes in Speicherstadt you're taking a big risk about what somebody might do, and if your income or your gaining of those cards is really heavily dependent on your plan working, you can really find yourself in real trouble in Speicherstadt, because it's very, very tight, especially money wise. You can have that situation in Speicherstadt where you needed 4 money to buy something at some stage in the auction. You don't have it, in which case you can't buy. You have to just take your man off, and that can be really painful.
And also, because things are in a strict order, like in this example, even if blue would like to buy the other, let's imagine that blue has exactly 3 money, and if blue were to have the opportunity to buy the second lot at 3, blue would love to do that. But is blue going to have that opportunity? Well, blue doesn't know. So blue has to make that decision earlier in the turn order, whether to pay the 1 for that card, which, let's be honest, they probably will, or
whether to hold out
for
Yes.
But
so you do have to have an overall plan of how you want the auction to come out.
Sure.
And it has to be sufficiently flexible that if it doesn't come out exactly right, you have to have something from it.
And so we talked about Spirium. Did you want to say something else?
I was saying Spirium is slightly more relaxed in that
you've
usually got more than one option, so you can get a compensation more easily.
Okay, let's talk about 1848 Australia.
No, this is one I don't know at all.
This is one I didn't know, and for the record, as a complete tangent, I watched a couple of minutes of a review of someone literally smoking a pipe while they were reviewing the game, which was a first for me, and that was an interesting thing to see. Anyway, this is a multiple lot turn order Dutch auction. It is not a Dutch priority auction as defined by Board Game Geek or Jeff Engelstein and Isaac Shalev. So in the rules, this is an image of how the companies are bought at the start of the game, and each column is completely independent. So you'll have little white markers starting off at the top. So the Melbourne and Hobbs, let me zoom in even more. Whoops.
Is this an 18xx
game?
Yeah,
it is an 18xx.
Right, okay, yeah, sure.
Just solid 18xx.
Yeah, good.
But you start off with your trains, and then you've got to decide what the companies do. It feels a little bit more involved than a standard 18xx game, because the companies have very specific powers, and there's a bit more differentiation, and there's the starting multiple lots Dutch auction with turn order sequence going on. So the Melbourne and Hobson's Bay Railway Company starts at £30. Odds Data starts at 70, and so forth. And on your turn, you can either buy something or lower the price of one thing, and it keeps going round. And so on your turn, you might say, well, I don't want any of these things. So my decision point is going to be which of these things is the most overpriced. Which one of them is going to impact my opponent's least? And I don't know. I've never played this, but just looking at it, I guess a 5 money decrease for the North Australian Railway is probably the least meaningful change as a percentage of money. But they all go down in 5, so there's always 30 money difference between the top and the bottom. And you're thinking, okay, which one's a bit more overcosted? Which one do I not mind lowering for my opponents? And then hopefully, when it gets back to me, something will have been lowered to the point where I'm like, yes, now I'm going to buy this.
So presumably, you all start with the same amount of money, and I don't know, that might be the case. I don't know. So you're going to, that makes sense. And then, so your capital is being used. Your capital is being used for buying a railway company. Do you have to buy a railway company? Do you
know? You're expected to buy at least one, but theoretically it could get to the bottom and still no one buys anything. But I think that if you don't have at least one railway company and an 18xx game,
in trouble.
I think you're probably not going to win. And I mean, there's some wrinkles in some 18xx games where the value of the company can change so much because the whole point of the game is that you buy
It's all
it and
about the
then you
value.
inject more value into it and then you make it worth even more. And then at the end, it's like, hooray, I've got all these shares. And then you might buy shares in other people's companies.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a bit more going on. But like this starting, it's basically just part of the game setup. So
it sounds good, though. It sounds like a fun way of starting because it does mean it forces you to automatically evaluate the value of each company right from the start, which is nice. So before anything's happened, basically.
I think it is a really interesting system. And I think that this is not a Dutch priority auction, we can agree, but and here's the interesting thing, where let's say like it could have been a Dutch priority auction if we all had, let's say, 5 meeples and then we started off putting meeples to like bottom to top, and then instead of having to do it to the turn order, you remove one of the meeples that are at the top.
It's a kind of.
I'm not saying it needs to be a Dutch priority auction. I'm just saying it's very close.
It's a kind of reverse. Because when you, I suppose that actually logically it might be considered the same as a Dutch priority auction because what you're doing
it's
is
missing the first half.
Well, but if you choose not to bid, you are decreasing one of you're decreasing one of the. It's almost like you could think it as when you're decreasing the value of one of them. That's logically equivalent to increasing the value of all the others. Is it? I'm not sure.
I mean, I thought you were going to say that it's almost like you've wrapped the 2 halves into 1 half, which is I've not bid on this. So it starts off assuming that everyone's bid on everything, but then I'm saying, you know what, actually, let's go back in time. I didn't bid on that. And so because of that, it's actually -5. It's kind of mechanically equivalent to going back in time and saying I didn't bid on it.
There's a mandatory purchase there. If you can't reduce the price, then you have to buy. That's interesting.
You can just reduce the price of something else.
What I mean is if everything is reduced, if all companies are down to their minimum price, then you have to purchase.
Oh yes, if no private company has yet been bought by any player.
By any player.
So basically, the game just demands that at least one company is bought. So theoretically, there could just be one person with. I mean, it's basically stopping it going completely off the rails.
Yes, that's right.
Which is interesting because normally
you don't want a train game to go off the rails. You really don't want a train.
You kind of expect people to know what they're doing, but this is a more. Even though GMT is not a mass market company, compared to 18xx, it is a relatively mass market thing, if you know what I mean. Because most 18xx games aren't even professionally printed, really.
They're really niche, yes.
And so at this point, it's saying, well, let's make sure that even if everyone's got no idea what they're doing, there will be at least one company. But yeah.
Which is fair, yeah.
And actually, I retract what I earlier said jokingly said about it being mechanically equivalent to going back in time, because it's not, because one person could make all the reductions on one thing, and or like it's not fixed on who can reduce it. Do you know what I mean?
That's right. Yes.
And I think there's a lot of ways that prices could be increased before they come back down. And I think that's the thing that, yes, in Speicherstadt and Spirium and Jurvik, it's done by people putting bids down, but it could have also been done by people, putting up, okay, I'm going to put up 4 markers, you'll put up 4 markers, and the last person puts up 4 markers. Like it could just be, this is the starting price, and everyone shifts them upwards X number of times. It could be something like that. And that doesn't have a name, but and I think that to have, actually, sorry, this is me going off on one at Jeff Engelstein and Isaac Shalev. I do apologize, Jeff and Isaac, if you listen to this, but it feels to me like there's too much wrapped up into this one definition, because the whole point of this was meant to be the building blocks, the atoms, the things that cannot be, to my mind, the more atomic it is, the more useful it is, because then the more ways there are of using that same thing for another game. And if we imagine that the key thing here is increasing the price, well, it doesn't need to be that the price is proportionally increased by the number of bids. It could be like a downforce system where, okay, I put down a couple of cards and everyone puts down some cards, and that determines how high each thing goes. And we all put down one card, and that determines the starting price. Because I think that in this example, this thing is the most valuable thing. Like, you know how downforce, you've got these cards which move multiple colors up differing amounts. You could
I don't know that.
Okay, well, I don't know that. Imagine cards that say, okay, in this game, I'm going to say green should go up 3,
right?
And
yes,
this should go up, blue should go up 2, and purple should go up 5. And maybe they're typically adding up to a certain amount. So you've got, like, there's a range, and then everyone puts down one card, flip them over simultaneously. That's the starting price, and now you start a multiple lot Dutch auction. And I think that would be interesting. You could also go the other way. You could go like, is there a mechanism for player enforced? I guess the opposite for a floor for starting bid is just, well, that's going to be a normal auction, so you don't really need that to be player determined.
I do think, well, we do. There is already an additional. The other thing we haven't mentioned about categorization and classification is you can have multiple. You can classify things in more than one place. In a lot of classification systems. In some, generally you can only classify them in one place. But in this case, you can classify games in more than one. And I have noticed actually that Speicherstadt has auction/bidding and also auction Dutch priority, so you can still find it in auction bidding.
Yeah.
Whereas
all of these have to be auction
if you look
by
at Spirium,
definition.
well, you'd think, but if you look at Spirium is just auction Dutch priority and hasn't got it as the more general one. It's another slight weakness of not having professional classifiers classifying things means that you can get these little anomalies. And I have to say, cards on the table. If for my own games that we've published as Surprise Stare, I haven't gone in and rigorously checked the classification of those, and that's my fault probably. So in here, because you've got Spirium, if you search for auction/bidding games, you won't get Spirium. I don't think, because there's no hierarchy of classification in Board Game Geek. I think so. An auction Dutch priority does not come under auction/bidding, does it? When you search,
correct.
So you just won't get it.
Totally separate things.
Independent.
And there is whilst there are all of these aspects, which I think it's great that it's changed now. There we go. Strategy, economic, auction bidding, Dutch priority, set collection, and it's also to do with cities. Hamburg, to do with Germany, and it's got a Yucatan implementation. And what that means for the case of Board Game Geek is just that if I was thinking, okay, what are all the set collection games out there, then I would be able to see all the 14,871 that are apparently to do with set collection. And then I can categorize them by ratings or whatever.
The interesting thing here is that all that mechanism categorization means is somewhere in the game there is that mechanism. It may be it could be something which is in an option, or it could be something which is potentially in an expansion even, that mechanism is there. So it may not be a main mechanism. So if you've got a game where there's a little bit of an auction in some option that you could possibly play if you want to, it can have that mechanism, but it doesn't have to be central.
Like it feels like we've gone off a big tangent about the nature of classification, and I think it is a worthwhile discussion to have.
Absolutely.
Because do you think that Dutch priority auction is a good invention as a term? It allows us to talk about it. I mean, I'd rather that it exists at all than it doesn't exist. That's what
I think so, because I think we've got at least 2 games, possibly 3 games with this mechanism.
Jorvik's a re-implementation.
Yes.
So, I mean, it comes
we've got Speicherstadt and Spirium.
And
we've got 2. So I think that in something with this vast data set, which is tens of thousands of records, avoiding something which is just a bucket of things we haven't classified properly, otherwise this would just be an auction/bidding. And if you like Speicherstadt and you're looking for something which has got a similar type of auction, you can click on auction Dutch priority and it will come up with a list which includes Spirium. So that I think is an advantage. I like it. So it allows you to find things which are similar, even if there's only 2. I still think that's a reasonable thing.
I mean, I feel like there should be probably like 4 before we really start putting it as a separate thing on Board Game Geek. I mean, for the purpose, if you look
at Dutch auction, true Dutch auctions, we didn't have very many true Dutch auctions in themselves, did we? I think we only had.
I'm going to say,
4, didn't we?
I feel like the purpose of this book is kind of for designers to think about what potentially might be.
Yes.
The purpose of Board Game Geek is to categorize what is, and I think that's subtly different. And I'm going to say that I believe that on Board Game Geek, I would be more happy with a just general auction other. And then once there are like 3 or 4 of the same type, then categorize it. But if there's only 2 or like 3's kind of on the cusp, like if there's
a question. I think it's a question of where you draw the line. Now, my view as a person who does classification is that in this environment, the purpose of classification is to be able to find things which are similar, right? That's the purpose. I mean, and it's not the purest approach of saying it's literally just classification isn't an end in itself. It's so that people can find similar things. Hence, you get these grey areas. Hence, you've got 1848, which may not be exactly what we mean by Dutch priority auction, but it's sufficiently similar, let's say, that we categorize it as such. And I think the power you've got here in Board Game Geek in the implementation of the search facilities is that if you hit on, if you've got Speicherstadt and you like that game, you can hit auction Dutch priority and find other things which have got a similar mechanism. I think that's quite nice. I like that.
It reminds me of auction compensation, where there's basically Furnace and the expansion to Furnace.
Yeah,
I understand that they want to say, hey, this is a cool new thing, let's give it a name. But that doesn't serve, that to me seems like it's just cluttering up Board Game Geek. That's my personal opinion. Whereas
if you didn't have that auction compensation node, if you like, in the classification system, you'd have to just put it as auction/bidding, wouldn't you? There's a general,
which is fine.
One.
And then once there's 2 or 3, like once there's like 4 games, sure, there's like 4 examples of this thing, let's do it. But
normally if we're doing professional classification, normally if there's only one example, we wouldn't normally put another category because it just makes the thing too bloated.
This one had nothing to do with Jeff. This is not part of the book, and
I think that's going too far. That is going too far. Classifying something, introducing a new node in the classification system just for one entry, that misses the point. Because as I said, the point about the classification is to find similar things. If there's only one, there isn't anything similar to it.
You argue that because of Jorvik, the Speicherstadt, and Spirium, that is enough to say, let's give it to them.
Yes, and to an extent, the Australia one, which is similar although not identical, I think.
And I'm glad you're enjoying this, Xate says, don't let your guests fight you on this, Alan. I think that we're done. I think that it's just a matter of opinion, and I would like to get back to our key questions. We've talked about how it's been defined. We've talked about some examples. So let's talk about, and we can break it down a little bit if we want, but how does Dutch priority auction impact the game and the game experience?
Yeah, well, I think it's both Spirium and Speicherstadt, both of which I played. It's a really interesting mechanism because it gives you really good decision points. Both strategically, it's how do I handle this auction in relation to all the other auctions that are going to happen later on in the game.
It's making sure that when you make a bid, it's not just, hey, this is something that I want to do.
Really meaningful.
It's increasing interaction.
Yeah.
I'm able to use my bids just to potentially block someone out, because that's something nice about Speicherstadt, that once someone's committed to buying something, well, I can put more things at the end just to make sure that they play one more.
Yes, exactly.
I can do that with no intention of buying anything, same as Spirium, to be fair. And it does not only increase interaction, but it increases the impact of each decision. You can feel the ripple effects every round. I can see I do this thing here, and then we'll see it resolve. And because the resolution doesn't take the whole game, but it's a cyclical thing that happens every round, I think it's actually intensely satisfying because you see its progress many, many times over the course of the game.
Spirium is slightly more complex, so has less impactful in that sense. Speicherstadt, it's really intense, and a mistake or what looks like a mistake, really, really does hurt. Spirium is sometimes it's more forgiving. It's more forgiving, I think.
Yeah,
and it's more thinky in a lot. Well, is it more think? It's more complex, which means you have to take more things into account. So it's more thinky. With Speicherstadt, it's much more purist. It's still really hard decisions, but it's usually a decision of, well, I want to put it there, but do I want to put it there? And that's it. With Spirium, it might well be.
I do feel like we're getting bogged down with the specific examples.
Well, there are only two.
That's the danger with something like this. I would rather we were trying to isolate the mechanisms, because there's no reason that there couldn't be more types of goods in Speicherstadt using the exactly same mechanism.
Yes.
There's no reason that you couldn't have, Spirium's mechanism, like the way that the Dutch priority auction is implemented in Spirium. There's no reason that you couldn't transplant that into Speicherstadt. It would still work.
Yes, it's such a specific mechanism that you're building the game. You're building the game around that whole mechanism. And in the classics of game design, because you're cutting down things, you're cutting out things which aren't vital to the design, and hence you get to Speicherstadt to an extent because everything else is, almost irrelevant. It's the set collecting aspect which gives you why you're buying things in the first place, and you're cutting everything else out to make it purist, concentrating on that mechanism.
It is quite. It is quite a complex system. The notion that we are putting down things that might be bids, or it might be just a way of increasing the cost for someone else. That's not something that comes naturally. It's something that I would say it's going to be about halfway through your game before you really understand it. And it's not something that you could really have in a mass market game. It's not something that you could have outside of the hardcore. Yeah, I'm going to say the hardcore hobbyist space, because even though these might not be the most hardcore games, I mean, it's no campaign for North Africa by any means, but let's be honest, anything that we consider a Euro game is fairly hardcore when compared to what
Yeah.
a
Yes.
typical person would buy in Waterstones.
Yes.
It's not going to be the relative simplicity of
No.
something like Pandemic or Catan,
Yeah.
where
If
I
you think
feel like people can
placing
understand that more intuitively.
Yeah, when you're placing that one, when it's your turn to place a meeple, what you're having to take into account is which lot are you putting it on, what is on the lot, what the value of the lot is in relation to other things you've already got and might get in the future. It's a lot of decision space. So yeah, and I think so. We're talking about how versatile it is. It's got to be the central mechanic of the game, really. So it's not particularly versatile. It's not something you can, like other auctions we've discussed, which you could add in as a part of a game. With these, not really. It's the central purpose of the game, really.
I think
Central purpose of
for
both
Dutch priority auction,
Spirium
as
and
defined by the person who invented the term, so I'm not going to quibble on the definition, that would be ridiculous. I'm not sure there's much more to explore, to be honest. I don't think, like, Speicherstadt and Spirium did lovely jobs, and I don't think if you could have that many fundamentally different experiences. And hello, Ori, it is lovely to
Hi,
see
Ori.
you as always. But I think that the key part is that if we deconstruct it a little bit, for me, and well, I think that I would really be excited to see more games where users determine the ceiling price for a Dutch auction before it goes down. And that doesn't need to be in the narrow definition that exists for Dutch priority auctions, but let's call that player influence starting price for Dutch auctions. I'm not good at snappy names.
I suspect that there will be other games in this kind of area which might get described as Dutch priority auctions. It might be a very. I mean, if you look at what's happened, Speicherstadt, which is the pure one, Spirium, which is a development of it, and 1848, which is another version. I think there's definitely room for developing this a bit more. And there may be other games which have got a very purist Dutch priority auction in them that could be developed in the future. I think there's certainly this design space has not been fully explored yet.
Nothing has.
Well, no,
So
quite.
I think the great thing about this is that front loading of information, the feeling that my choices matter and I am impacting not just myself, not just my own opportunities, but the opportunity
Everybody
cost for
else's.
you. I'm able to get into your face. Haha. And
Yes.
so I think that people who like high agency, high thoughtfulness, complex decisions.
Yeah. Hard, complex decisions. Yep.
I think that the problems might be analysis paralysis.
Yes, that is true. Especially, actually, that's one of the things with Spirium. It can take a long time to make decisions in Spirium because there are lots of opportunities. And if you look at the Spirium one, you're having to decide not just on one card; it's on both cards that it's adjacent to. So there's more decision space there. So yes, possibly there might be an AP problem.
And I don't think, well, neither of us have used this
No.
in anything as written, but have you gotten any inspiration for something that you might use? I mean, I'm genuinely really excited now by the idea of player influenced ceilings of prices before doing the multiple lots Dutch auction.
I like that 1848 thing. The idea that you've got a set high price, but you could either buy it at that, or you either buy something or you move the price down. I like that, actually. And that, I mean, that's very specific in that game. But I can see that actually.
And just to clarify, it
Multiple-
is 1848 Australia because
1848
there's
Australia, not 1848. There's another
multiple
1848.
games
Yes.
called
Yes.
1848. Just
I
to
like the
clarify.
1848 Australia's. Yeah, I do like that
There
implementation,
we
and
go.
it's worth investigating that another
Mhm.
possibility.
I think that multiple lots, I understand it's not typical Dutch auction, but mixing that with a multiple lot system, I think does lead to some really interesting gameplay. And deciding which one you reduce the price of, deciding where you're, what
Yes.
impacts you're going to have. And I think that there's, yeah, it's kind of a twist on a marketplace.
In fact, I can think of one of my designs. I'm just writing a note to myself. I might use it. I might actually use it.
I could see myself doing
Yeah.
something with this in the next couple of years for sure. I'm
Yeah.
really excited, and it's been a lovely chat. I
Thank
think
you,
that
yes,
at this
it has.
point, I want to kind of wind it down.
Yeah.
And as always, I like to ask you, Alan. Would you like to ask me a question? At this point, I ask you lots of questions, so
Well,
let's talk about the question
yes.
of the day. Question of the day. Here's a little question before we go on our way. Question of the day.
A quick question. What is your favorite online board game?
Oh,
Or is that too difficult?
no, I think that recently I've decided that it is Break the Code. And I was talking about this is something that I don't know if I would want to play in real life. Let me show. So here's Break the Code, and I've only got one bit of information. So my in the two-player game, my opponent has 5 cards, and I need to work out what they are. In
Okay.
the 3-player version or 4-player version, I need to work out what the missing cards are, if
Right.
that makes sense.
Yes.
And obviously, I know what my own cards are, so they've been crossed off. And each turn, I get to ask one question. So the sum of the centrals is 16. I know nothing except for that.
Right.
So it could be any of the remaining cards. And then you get to ask things about the colors. You might ask, okay, do you have a number 6 or a number 7? And you have to pick one of those before you ask the question. And what I enjoy about this game is at a certain point, I've got enough information that I spend literally 10, 20 minutes working out the
Right.
stuff
Yes.
and solving that puzzle. But if it was in real life, I mean, I wouldn't want to make other people wait 10 minutes for me to just do this thing. Whereas playing turn-based in Board Game Arena, like one move every couple of days, completely fine. And I don't think anyone's
Yes.
bothered by, oh,
Yes. So
that-
it completely avoids the AP, which you would automatically get in that if you're playing face to face. I think. Yes.
yes. And so this is a weird example of something where, yeah, it's feels
Well,
like the most streamlined games, but I think this reflects a problem that I tend to have with deduction games because I enjoy that puzzle, but David Brain, Ellie Dix, they're going to be a
they're
lot
all too
faster
good.
than me.
Yeah, I know.
And if I'm playing with them, I'm just going to basically give up. Whereas if they were spending like 2 minutes and I was spending 20 minutes, then I might stand a chance.
Yes, exactly. I agree.
Eventually.
That's interesting because I've got a couple of favourites probably here. One is Reef Encounter, which is Richard Breeze's game. Now, the thing about Reef Encounter face to face is there can be AP because it's got a lot of moving parts and you have to work things out a lot, and so it can take you a long time just to work out what the best move is. Now, obviously, if you're online, online, not playing real time, that's fine. And it works really, really, really well. The implementation is good online too. The other one I like to do online is complex war game. So if I'm playing Combat Commander, then I love it online because it does all the hard work of setting it all up for you.
I mean, the
Which is
difference
nice.
between playing online versus playing in person is a really interesting one, and one that we could talk about for another hour and a half.
Definitely.
But for sure, at this point, I'm going to ask over to you. What are you up to? You can share boxing if you want to. I'm having one of my parents visit, so we're going to hang out. I don't know exactly what we'll do. I'm going to make sure that, cook some sorts of stir fry, maybe some potatoes, green beans, other things, fried together sauce. But
Nice.
maybe they'll be up for playing some game that I've done because, they're like, oh, what are you doing? And I'll be like, yeah, this is something that I've made that's hopefully approachable to you, a non-gamer. We might have a bit of a walk. And then in the evening, I'm going to do a bit of emailing and sorting out stuff, and hopefully some postage stuff.
That sounds great.
We'll see what happens.
Okay.
What are you up to?
I shall be going over to Ely to visit Brett and the guys at the Ely playtest group. And I'm going quite early because I'm going to go through with Brett the rules for Last Bug Standing in the Circle of Doom.
Ooh.
So Brett
is that the blind test, or is that getting Brett's professional editing?
It's exploiting Brett's professional editing capability. So yeah, he has already played the game. So it's really getting it. What we tend to do here is we get, and we've done it with one of Charlie and I did this with one of Brett's games earlier. We sit down and he plays it just with the rules, ignoring everything else, and all I do is sit there and take notes. So it leaves the player the complete freedom to misinterpret anything that they want, which obviously highlights things, and that's a really, really good way of doing it, because you can pick up silly things that you just, oh look, you missed out something in the setup, and I've got this spare piece in the game,
it feels
and I don't know
like
that kind of thing.
Possible misinterpretations or likely misinterpretations are kind of level 1, but then level 2 is just the ease of getting in, because it's all well and good saying, well, if I spend a minute looking at this, I am going to find the answer, but realistically in the middle of a game I might give up after 20 seconds and be like, well, it's not in the place where I thought it would be. I'm just going to make a decision and carry on. Or maybe I give up on the game, and also the pointing you towards what to do. And hello, Mike. You're just in time for the, I believe, recap and wrap up before we finish up. So to recap and wrap up, we talked about so much stuff today. We talked about Sobek. I've been playing games recently like Sobek. We talked about Living Forest, which just looks gorgeous. We talked about the idea of classification and had a few tangents about whether Dutch priority auctions should really have been categorized. And Alan falls on yes, and I fall on yes, it's a nice thing, but I wish that they'd done it in a more setting the price in a slightly more generic way that had the potential to have something else go in there. Because let's say I make a game about setting the price of multiple lots before a Dutch auction that's kind of in a turn-based manner. Well, then, it's strictly speaking, it shouldn't be in there, but I guess it might as well. I mean, I don't know. We talked about, obviously stuff gets misclassified, like Small World, no reason being there. 1848 Australia, like this is it really? Well, there's no better place for it to be. Definitely not this 1848. Speicherstadt, as pure as it can be, giving us all the upfront decisions. By having it be in a strict turn order, it really pushes for that crunchy, meaty decision space. And Jorvik, neither of us have played, but it seems to be an identical system. Just a few tweaks. Barium with the firstly, each bid is for 2 possibilities. It gives you more flexibility later on, more flexibility on what you might want to purchase, Or on the other hand, you might have more flexibility on what you want to increase the price of. But then you've also got the flexibility later on that when you're removing your people, you can get more money. So this is actually encouraging people to have that tension of, wait, were they just going there to get money, or were they going there to actually bid for it, which is maybe going to add a little bit more tension, I suppose. And but it certainly makes it a little bit more forgiving. We talked about 1848 Australia, the way that if you don't buy something, you reduce the price for everyone else. Again, not a Dutch priority auction, but very interesting thing, well worth discussing. We talked about games that we enjoy online, Break the Code and Reef Encounters, things where because it takes so long to ponder and the game deserves a lot of pondering, it's kind of like the old classics, Go, for example,
Yeah.
where,
Yeah.
to be honest, with Go, I always play very, very quickly because I'm not the kind of person who will ponder stuff that much unless it, but Break the Code, it's like, well, there's one exact thing and it's either I've got it or I don't. Whereas I'm more willing for whatever reason to just. But it's been a lovely chat, and I think we both agreed that this is not a mechanism with a lot of versatility, but we might both use aspects of it, and we
Yeah, we might.
might both riff off it. I think that seems
Yes.
very
Yes.
possible.
Could I make one last point?
Yes.
That'd be right. The other danger in classification is where you categorize exclusively. So the example here is because Speicherstadt is classified as a Dutch priority auction, and so is Spirium, they're not classified under auction multiple lot, when in fact they are actually both multiple lot auctions. So you have to be careful. I would actually classify them as both multiple lot auction and also Dutch priority auction. So that is a danger, which in a sense is a byproduct of what you've pointed out. If you do have these as Dutch priority auctions, and you don't include them in what might be considered a wider upper level in the classification system, which will be auction multiple lot. If you search for auction multiple lot, you will not get either of those two games come up. So there is a danger. It's another little danger of using a classification system without using professional classifiers.
I mean, you're absolutely right, and it does say the actual format of the auction can follow any of the auction mechanisms.
Yep.
So 100%. And it does make me wonder, what would a single lot Dutch priority auction be like? I mean, I guess that would almost be like that would actually be an interesting game. Maybe we should make that. So a single lot Dutch priority auction, you can either put your bidding things to increase the price or potentially bid on this one thing, or you can use those same workers to just get standard effects. So it's a kind of worker placement with one auction happening in parallel.
Whoa.
Do you think I should make that game? Or I've probably got enough stuff I'm doing. Maybe in a few months.
I think we need to park that one somewhere. Yeah. On the Board Game Geek classification systems. That would be really fun. From my point of view, anyway, as a professional classifier. I'm not sure anybody else. I have to say, I'm not sure anybody else finds classification as interesting as I do, because I used to do it as a professional. So it's maybe it's something to ask people. Are you interested in doing that?
Well, for now, if you want to check me out, I am Stuff by Bez in all of the places. And tomorrow, fingers crossed, I'll be able to have Kirsten Lunde join me, designer of Questable, which is the winner of the 2022 LDEC design contest, and also probably the most ambitious LDEC game so far.
Nice. Yay.
I'm really excited by it. The fundamental rules, I think, are almost certainly done, and the levels we are kind of 30%, 20% done, like maybe. But yeah. And Mike says, write it down and come back to it. Yeah, always a good idea. You know what?
Yeah.
I'm going to write down those ideas and come back to it when I've got more time and energy to actually pursue those games, because I've got to finish things. I can't be working on anything that
I know.
takes
I know
longer
what you
than a
mean.
day.
Oh, I so know what you mean. Got to get some things off the list of things to do. Yep.
If you want to check out Alan Paull, where do you like to be found?
If you want to get hold of me, I'm best on email, which is alan@alanpaul.co.uk or alan@surprisetailgames.co.uk. But I'm also on Twitter at benthamfish, and we have a Surprise Dare account as well, and I have a blog on the Surprise Dare Games website, which I encourage you, if you haven't already, to subscribe to if you want to hear a bit more about what I'm doing.
Nice.
Thank you.
And to everyone out there, please spread the word if you've enjoyed this, if you think it's meaningful. And I don't know what will happen after I stop my daily streaming. Part of me is thinking I might continue doing it once a week while I'm in the UK and then slow it down or change the timing significantly when I'm emigrating. But because I do enjoy our fortnightly chats about mechanisms and my fortnightly chat with Jess, which is also on a Wednesday. But yeah, I would like to come to the end of this if we can.
We're only on A.
I mean, there are a lot of A's. That's the thing.
There are a lot of A's, yeah.
Yeah, A's. I mean, conversely, there is only one Z and there's no X or Y. Just to point that out.
To reassure us. Yes.
But yes, we are not so far down. But yes, so everyone, thank you very much, everyone. Most importantly, thank you, Alan, for being here. And for now, lots of love. We'll be back in a couple of weeks to talk about English auctions and what that means.
Yes.
And bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, bye, everyone.
Bye.